the end of our lab time last week, which is I want to go through what you are requested to do for your first lab-related homework to make sure that we are all on the same page. I want to particularly give you some information that you need to be aware of as you do your work so as to maximize your point opportunity associated with this, because there are a number of things that we want to get in the habit of doing correctly to make sure that we can build off of that foundation this semester. So what I'm going to have to do first is something that most of you probably took care of in lab time when we were together on Tuesday, and that is moving the data out of the ERP system so that I can work with it in Excel. So the data that I'm going to be working with here, just so I don't advantage anyone who was on any of the teams D, E, F, or G. I'm going to go back to working with Team A from our very first lab experience. And so one of the things that means is that I only have information from round one in here. So in that respect, this will look a little bit different than what you will see because you will have 3 rounds of information. I am recording this, and hopefully we will not have a technical difficulty like we had the first week. So if there's something that I do today that when you're doing your homework you forget how to do, keep in mind you can always refer back to that. So I'm going to start with launching the wrong transaction here accidentally. Under reports, 2 reports that we're using at this point, ZVC2 and ZVA05. So let me start by launching ZVC2. And I'll make this observation. One of the elements of significant difference between this report and the other report is this has an entry for every day. And so if in a given day we did not sell a particular product, that product is still represented in this output, but with zeros next to it. That's different than what we see in the other report. You'll also notice, though, that this particular report doesn't have information about the region of the country that the sale is made in, whereas the other report does. So once I have this report up, I'll click on the export button and elect to send this to a spreadsheet. And then at this point, you likely can just hit the check mark because it's going to default to Excel. And I have to figure out where I want it to put this. So for now, I'm just going to put this on my desktop, name it ZVC2, and click Save. And then allow and allow. And eventually here, Excel will launch. And my company's information is now loaded up for me to begin processing. Yes, sir.
What does the summary spreadsheet have that the details don't?
The summary, and I want to make sure I'm looking at the right, so this particular report, what does this have that the other one doesn't? Yeah. The only thing that comes to my mind off the top of my head is it has the data by day. Is the big difference.
Price.
It
doesn't have price.
It does not, yeah. So I mean, what in terms of what it has the data by day. In terms of what it doesn't have the area, it doesn't have the price. And there could be other things. We'll look at both of them together and see, but those are the big differences.
I'm thinking like, I'm only going to use the detail because it has everything that the summary has in mind.
Well, I think what we can do this now. We can look at it if we look at the detailed one, the big difference here is, as I was observing, see, I can tell I don't have any rows with zeros in it. So for a particular product, if I did not sell it during a given day, it's not going to show. And if you'll remind me, so I don't forget, I'll show you why that's important before we're done here. Okay, so let me go back to where we were with the one a moment ago, the summary, and so I'll go back to Excel. And remember, we observed that the big thing you have to do here is you have to fix this data. If you do not fix what I'm about to fix, your chart the sort order is going to be wrong, and that will be a very easy thing for me to detect, and anyone else who looks at your chart will see that the days are out of order and the rounds are out of, well, the rounds probably won't be out of order, but the days definitely will be, and so we have to fix that. So this may be the hardest part of the process to remember. It's why I wanted to go back through this. So I clicked in cell A2 because that's the first cell that's broken, if you will. And then I'm holding down the shift key and pressing the right arrow so that now cell A2 and B2 are highlighted. But I need to highlight all of the data that are contained in the range between A2 and B whatever at the end of my spreadsheet. So I will now hold down Control Shift and press the down arrow. And now I have highlighted the cells that I need to for the sake of what we're about to do. And I'm going to click on, it's hard to see here with the resolution on my laptop here, but I'm going to click on this yellow square with an exclamation mark in it and choose Convert to Number. And so I have now processed, this is the information that was from the ZVC2 spreadsheet. Let me go ahead, since we just had a question about compare and contrast. This is the ZVA05 report, so let me go ahead and move it to Excel as well. So I'll choose Export, Spreadsheet, check mark. I'm going to call this ZVA05, save, allow. If you clicked remember my decision, you probably saved a couple of button clicks there. But you'll notice here now I have the same problem. So I'm going to click on cell A2, shift right arrow to highlight to cell B2, and then Control Shift down arrow. Now if you forget how to do that, you can click and drag with your mouse. The key is to make sure you only highlight the cells that are messed up, which means not highlighting the title at the top. And then I'll choose Convert to Number. So the question a moment ago about similarities and differences, if we set the two of these side by side, I have round and day, but you'll notice ZVA05 adds area, which is not represented over here. ZVA05 also has price, which is not represented in ZVC2. I do have quantity, value, and cost, so those are the same, but once again over here on the left I have 0 values, but in the other one I don't. So what I'm going to elect to do here, just for the sake of our walkthrough real quick, is let's do some things with ZVA05. So there are two things I have to do in my spreadsheet before I can start making charts. One of them we just did with fixing the numbers. The next thing I have to do is select all of the data. So at this point I could click on cell A1 and drag down until I get to the end of the data, or there's an easier way to do it, which is I can click in cell A1 and I can do Control Shift right arrow and then Control Shift down arrow. And that highlights all of the data for me. The reason why I like those is once you get good at that, you can do that in like a second, whereas clicking and dragging sometimes is a pain if you accidentally make a mistake there. Once I've highlighted all the data that I want to incorporate into my charting here, I go up to the menu at the top and choose Insert, and then a little bit to the right of center, there's an option there called Pivot Chart. So I elect to Insert Pivot Chart, and on this dialog that pops up, if you followed the process that I've described so far, you don't even have to read this dialog box. Just click OK. And you are now going to be presented with the tools for creating a pivot chart. As an aside, whenever you make a pivot chart, you get a pivot table for free, kind of in the background. Which is why I always elect to build a pivot chart, even if I think I'm going to put a table of numbers in a particular report. Just a couple of observations. You may accidentally do what I just did, which is where in the world did my control panel go on the right side of the screen? Because you can see it disappears. That happened just because I accidentally clicked on a cell out here in the spreadsheet. To get it back, just click on this at the top here. That's your charting tool, and it will bring it back. Okay, and since we talked about this in lab, I'm going to go a little bit quickly here, but oh, that's funny. I guess a ghost is joining us now. That door is really, really weird, and we had them fix it earlier this week, but apparently it's not like 100% fixed, because it used to be you could hardly get it to stay shut. So now it stays shut, except when a ghost wants to learn about pivot charting, I guess. I don't know. All right, so the key thing here's what I would encourage you about how to think about this. What do I want my chart to be focused on? And the two common, although perhaps not exhaustive, but the two common things to make a chart on are the number of units that I sold and the revenue related to how much I sold. And it's obvious important for us to be able to distinguish that in the presentation, because there's a big difference between selling 5 cases of water and selling €5 worth of water. Those are two very, very different things. So for the sake of this example, I'm going to focus on the revenue that we earned, which is represented by value. So I'm going to click and drag value down to the values box. And this shows me now a chart that is the total amount of revenue that this particular company has made over the course of its entire life, which for this company was just actually one round of operation. Well, if I look at this and say, okay, that's fine, that's how much revenue we made, which is, if you hover your cursor over it, you can see the precise number, a little bit over, what is that, 95,000 euros there, 95945. So I want to break this up, though, and look at it by individual product. So I'll come down here and grab material description, and I'll drop it on legend, and now I have a chart that shows all of my individual products, and the height of the column is reflective of how much of that I in fact sold. So this would be a perfectly fine chart for you to turn in to explain something about the performance of your company. Now, if I wanted to show my performance in round 1, then my performance in round 2, then my performance in round 3, the way I do that is through the axis control down here in the bottom left of the set of 4 squares, and I grab round and I drag it down to axis, and you'll notice my chart doesn't really change, and that's because I only have data for round 1. If you were to follow the exact process that I just did for your data, you would now see a cluster of 6 with a 1 under it like you see here, and then you would see another cluster of 6 columns, and then a third cluster of 6 columns. So the key here is for you to figure out what you want your chart to show. And so let's assume that we're happy with this. I'm going to get rid of rounds here since it's just adding white space that doesn't need to be here. So the next step in our process is to actually make the chart. Now, we're not done. There are a number of questions we need to ask ourselves at this point. Question 1 is, over here on the right side of the chart, I have a legend. Excel put that there for me automatically. Do I need that legend for someone to be able to understand this chart? Do I need that legend? What do you think? Yes. Why do I need that legend?
It describes.
What's that? Okay, that's how I identify which column goes with which product, right? The blue goes with the blue, the green goes with the green, and such. If I got rid of that legend, we wouldn't know what's going on. So clearly, I need the legend. Now, let's talk about a couple of other things that I don't think we mentioned last time in regards to pivot charting. If you only wanted to show a subset of your products. You don't want all 6 products here. You'll notice that above the legend, and we'll see this in other places in future charts we create, we have this region here with a label in it with a little drop down arrow. If I click that drop down arrow, it opens this dialog box that allows me to choose what products are shown. So I could, for example, turn off the 1 liter products just by unchecking those, and then I hit OK, and the chart gets reformatted. So many times what you'll do is you'll create a chart that has what you want to show, but maybe has items beyond what you want to show, and so you use the technique that I just showed you to remove those extraneous items. I could very easily go back and put all the items in by going back to that control and just toggling them back on. So, am I done? Well, the answer is no. Okay? Why do I say I am not done with this chart?
There's no title.
There's no title. Why is a title important? So that the person who's looking at this chart that is not you knows what this is. You know, right now, if I were to put this in a report, people would look at this and say, what is this? Okay, so we need to add a title to this. How do we add a title? Well, in Excel, right here at the top of our charting area, you'll notice there's a little plus sign for chart elements. If I click on that, I can turn on chart title. And that'll just put the words chart title up there at the top that I can then click on and edit. Now, I want to emphasize this. You don't want to write a book or a paragraph here, but you want to give the user enough information so that if they look at your chart, they know what it is that you're showing. So, for example, would this be a good title for my chart? And I'll be good about capitalization here. Product sales in round 1. Is that a good title or a bad title for this chart?
Probably want a date.
What's that?
Probably want a date.
Well, round 1 kind of serves as a date because that's in the context of the simulation. That's how we identified it. I'll go ahead and tell you this, that is a very bad title. So who can tell me why that is a very bad title?
This is about revenue and not sales.
Okay, the title leaves it totally ambiguous as to whether or not we're talking about unit sales or sales revenue. So a user looks at this, a reader looks at this and says, oh, half a liter clear pure, they sold a little bit more than 20,000. Well, 20,000 what? 20,000 cases or 20,000 euros? I can't tell. I didn't make the chart if I'm the end user. I'm seeing this in a report and I don't know what this means. I created the chart. I know that this is value, so that in fact means this is revenue. So I would call this instead product sales revenue in round 1. And now when the user sees that, they're going to know exactly what that is. If I created a different chart and it was showing the number of cases that I sold, a good title for that might be unit sales in round 1. Okay? Let me ask you this. Suppose you wanted to create a chart that just showed 1 liter clear pure. So now my question to you is, what do I need to fix for this chart? Well, let's go back through the questions I asked you a moment ago. Do I need the legend? I do not need the legend if I give this chart a good title. The legend is totally worthless here because I'm not distinguishing between different flavors. So instead, what this should be is this should be sales revenue of 1 liter clear pure in round 1. And then I don't want the legend over here. It's doing nothing but being a distraction. So I click on it and hit the delete key on my keyboard. So one of the things that I will look at when I grade your charts is, do you have a legend, and should there be a legend? And if there should be, then there should be one there, and that's great. But if your chart is one that doesn't need a legend, get rid of it. Here's the fundamental rule of charting. Anything that doesn't need to be there, we need to get rid of. Okay? I'm not going to take off for this in your homework, but I would contend that this word total down here is not adding any value either. And I'd probably get rid of that word total, because why does that even need to be there? You'll notice as well that this chart, and although it might not be clear at the moment how this would work, this guy up here in the upper left, that's a charting control similar to what we saw a moment ago that gave us the ability to limit our flavors we were showing. I don't want that in my final chart either. So what do I do about that? I can click on that, and then I right click, and you'll notice here, hide all field buttons on chart. I do that, and that's gone. And so now I've got a pretty good chart here. Now, while you're in Excel, this is a good time to grab a hold of the corner and reformat the chart to the proportionality that you want. You know, you're just looking to make it good there. I'll add a couple of other things here. It would be nice, although I'm not necessarily going to grade on this, over here on your axis, the numbers are really long, and you'll notice they don't have commas in them. If you double click on this, this opens up controls over here, and you can here change things related to how numbers are shown. So I could come over here to number, and let's see here, it's harder for me to see here locally because my monitor is really, really slow resolution here. So I'm looking for, I think, under number, let's just open this up, tick marks, number. I think what I have to do is change this from general to number. There you go. And notice now it's put in the comma, and you could leave it that way, or what I like to do sometimes even is numbers with 0 decimal places. And so now I've got a chart that's going to be a lot easier for someone to read, including someone like me who's having trouble seeing what's on my screen here. So I make a chart that I like. Let me show you something that is a helpful hint that will keep you from wanting to put your fist through your computer screen, because I have made this mistake a lot in my life. I want to put this in my final report. So here's what I'm going to do. First thing I do is click on the chart to highlight it. And then I hit Control-C on my keyboard to copy it. So now I'm going to go to Microsoft Word. Now, in the context of your homework, you might want to open up your homework document and paste this in underneath the particular question. But in my example here, I'm just going to do this. You know, let's assume that in my paper I have blah, blah, blah. And now underneath blah, 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 this is where I want to put my chart. So here is what I recommend you do. Go under Insert, and actually it's not under Insert. It's under Home. Paste, and what you want to do is you want to paste in a picture. So choose Paste Picture, and you can see what might happen to you, like what just happened to me is I got this way much bigger than it needed to be. Well, now I can just grab one of the corners and click and drag to make this the size that I want it to be in my report. Okay? The key is, because I put this in here as a picture, I can very easily center it if I wanted to. If I were really trying to make this report look attractive, I could wrap text around it. I have a lot more control over this as a picture. But the big reason why I tell you to put this in here as a picture is if you did not put it in as a picture, if you just did a normal Control V for paste, Excel would put that into this document as what is called a link, which means that if you then went back to Excel and changed what was here, it would change what's in your Word document. But by putting it in as a picture, the picture isn't going to change. Here's what I've had students do before. I get their homework and I ask them to make 10 charts, and I see 10 of the exact same chart. And I'm like, and I know what they did, but they don't realize what they did. What they did is they made their first chart and put it into Word. Then they made their second chart and put it into Word, but they were working from the same Excel document. So when they thought they were making their 10th document, they were actually changing the first 9 pictures, first 9 graphs they put in, and then adding the 10th. If you put it in as a picture, you'll never have that problem. If you put it in as a link, you will almost definitely have that problem. If you say, well, I really would rather put it in as a link, okay, that's fine. But then what I would recommend then is after you put the chart in, close Excel and go back through the whole process again for the next picture, which clearly is not something you want to do because that's a giant pain in the neck. Okay? Let's do another example here. And this time we'll use the other data set, which is the ZVC2, which is the one that has the daily data. And I'll show you an example of why this is, why this data set gives us the ability to do something the other one didn't. So click on cell A1. I've already fixed the number problem. Click on cell A1, Control Shift left arrow, or excuse me, Control Shift right arrow, Control Shift down, and I've highlighted all the data. Insert, pivot chart. You only have to do this once. The only reason I had to do it a second time is because I've moved to the other data set. So let's do this. Let's look at material description. I want to show the quantity of how many units I sold. So here's the number of units of each product I sold, which is that the same? That's a different number than we looked at a moment ago, because before we were looking at revenue. And what I want to do now is I want to look at daily sales of a particular product. So in order to look at daily sales, I drag round down to axis, and I drag day down to axis. Now what happens, and it's very important that round be on top of day, because you'll notice if you look very closely at my chart here, I have numbers for round 1 through 20, and then because of how we ended the simulation that very first week we played, I have day 1 of quarter 2, or day 1 of round 2. So here's an example. I want to get rid of that. How do I get rid of round 2 in my particular chart? I have these field labels, just like we worked with a moment ago for material description. I can come over here, click on the round field label, and turn off round 2. So now I just have round 1. That's a part of my chart. Rule of thumb, whenever you are showing daily data, you want to employ a line chart, because it's very, very hard visually for someone to connect up what's happening from one day to the next the way this chart is composed now. So in order to change this to a line chart, I go up here to my pivot chart tools, switch to design, and change chart type and pick a line chart. So there I have a line chart showing my daily sales of really all 6 of my products at this point. Well, maybe I only want to look at a subset of my products. So now I'll come here and I'll say I only want to look at 1 liter Clear Pure and 1 liter Spritz. So I use my field labels to turn everything off, and now I have the chart that you're seeing here. Now, do I need a legend? Yes, because I have to be able to distinguish what's the orange line representing and what's the blue line representing. Do I need all this other stuff around the perimeter here? I don't. So before I end making this chart, I would want to make sure I go in here and hide all the field buttons to get rid of those. I still would need to put a title on this chart. A good title here might be daily sales revenue. You could just leave it at that, daily sales revenue. You could say daily sales revenue of and name the two products, but I still have to have the legend there. Let's look at making this exact same chart in ZVA05. Yes, sir.
Do you care if we label the axis?
That's fine if you want to do that. Absolutely. Absolutely. So this chart right here shows two of our products' daily sales. Let's go here and let's try and replicate that same chart with the data from ZVA05. Okay, we did this one here based on the quantity that was sold, so I will switch here to doing this based on the quantity that was sold. You'll notice I don't have my field labels anymore to pick which materials are shown because I turned them off. I can right click now and I can turn them. I'm looking for, I've got to remember how to turn them back on. I think I have to actually, they move this for me. It's up here under field buttons. And, well, I thought it was under field buttons. Yeah, I turned, so when you turn them off, to turn them back on, you have to go back under your pivot chart tools under Analyze and turn them back on here. I think that's another example. You could also turn them off there if you wanted to, as opposed to the way I showed you a moment ago. But you'll notice I don't have a legend anymore because remember I got rid of the legend. This plus sign up here allows me to bring back elements of my chart so I could toggle the legend back on. And now let's say I want to add another product to this mix. So now I have two products. Well, I want to show daily information, so I'll do round and day, just like we did a moment ago. And then, just like we did a moment ago, we'll change this chart to a line chart. But my question is there a difference between the chart you're looking at here and the chart you're looking at here? And pretty obviously the answer is yeah, there's a difference. Why is there a difference? Well, for this particular chart right here, which is based on ZVC2, you have an entry for every product for every day. And we have a lot of days where there was 0 sales. Now, in fact, what happens is when both products are at 0, the lines stack on top of each other. So it sometimes gets hard to tell, but most users would understand that in this situation, nothing of either product was sold on the first 3 days or first 2 days. Then on day 3, the blue product, the 1 liter clear pure, jumped up there. So the merit of the ZVC2 report having the 0 values in it is that chart is a much better representation of reality than this chart is right here because of the weird way that the line behaves. And in fact, if I were to show just one product, it becomes even more obvious what the difference is. Here's 1 liter clear pure sales from ZVC, or this is ZVA05. And then if I do 1 liter clear pure, got to turn my field buttons back on here. If I do 1 liter clear pure over here, you see the chart looks very, very different. What I want to emphasize to you is whenever you finish a chart, look at the chart to make sure that what you are looking at makes sense. Now, the charts you're going to be able to create right now are pretty simplistic. And it would almost be hard for you to go wrong. But as we move into more advanced charting with a more advanced data set, it's actually pretty easy to make a mistake. I can remember not that many semesters ago in an undergraduate class where they played a different version of ERP Sim than we're playing in a moment, and a team got up to present to the class a report on their performance, and they had a chart that showed their sales revenue. And their chart showed that their sales revenue was like $10 billion or something like that. And they had used the wrong numbers in the wrong way and created a chart that was just so outrageously incorrect. You would like to think that if they looked at it, they would realize something was wrong. You know, if you create a chart and you say, oh, 1 liter clear pure, we sold 150,000 cases of that in round one. Well, what you always want to do is stop and think about what you know about the context and say, is it likely that we sold 150,000 cases of that product? No, that doesn't make sense at all. I must have done something wrong. I can tell you from talking to professionals who manipulate data like this for a living and lead teams that do this, the admonition I just gave you is what they tell their coworkers all the time too. Because it's not hard to make a mistake where you think you're creating a chart that says one thing, but because of how you created the chart and the data that you use, it actually is totally bogus. It's wrong information, even though the chart looks pretty. So what I want you to get out of the habit of doing is don't look at this and say, wow, that's pretty. The line's like making different shades, it's moving up and down. This looks like a real chart, therefore it must be good. You know, take the time to put a good title on it. Take the time to look at the data and make sure that it really is representative of what you believe reality to be. Questions about any of this? Okay, so this is your first homework assignment for this class, and I'll forewarn you, all the things that I've talked about will be incorporated into your grade. So make sure that as you go through and you create these charts, you're attentive to the legend, the title, the formatting, all of this, so that you can create something that's a good overall presentation.
And the values down there, sometimes you have to change it to sum and count.
Yes.
It's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, and I don't think you should run into that too much with this data set. It is a more advanced feature that you can down here. Right now, this is based on adding up the number of units of 1 liter clear pure that your company sold, but you do have the ability to go down here and in the values box, click on this drop down here, and you can choose value field settings, and you can change it to different kinds of calculations. Now, this really, for this data we're looking at here, really would not make sense, I don't think. Let's see what happens if we change this to average and click OK. Yet nothing actually changes here in the data. But when we do more advanced charting and we start seeing different kinds of numbers, we'll use that technique to change to different forms of calculating.
It seemed like mine would default to count, and I would change it to sum all the time. So
It depends. What I have found is usually, which isn't 100% of the time, but usually if you will fill the value box first before you start dragging in the other stuff, you won't see that happen. But sure enough, if you see a chart that looks like this, something's wrong somewhere. And that's the problem that he was just talking about here, where this got changed to count. So if you ever actually see that happening in your chart, you can come down here, click on this, and value field settings, and just change that to sum. And that'll fix that to what you were likely expecting to see. Yes?
Let's see, when I was working on this morning for revenue, I did value minus, I made another column to do value minus cost for me. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Did you do it in Excel before you moved to the pivot chart, or did you do it inside a pivot chart?
I did it inside picture. I created
Okay.
a column.
Okay. Yeah. Did you? Okay. Yeah, we're going to. I haven't shown yet, but we'll talk about creating what's called a calculated field, which sounds like what you did, and that's absolutely great.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? As you're working on this, if you do run into questions, please feel free to email me. My goal is, my hope is that all of you will do a great job on this, and so anything I can do to facilitate that happening, I am very happy to do so. Next week in lab, we move to a different ERP sim game that will be a little bit more sophisticated in terms of the industry and the company and other things of that sort, and also will allow us to do some more analytics that aren't possible in this version of the game. Let me share with you a secret that I didn't tell you before on purpose. The game that we played this last week, there were earlier this week, there were 4 teams. You really weren't competing with each other. You were like 4 companies in your own distinct universe. And so it didn't matter what prices another team set or anything else. You weren't even in the same universe as them. The game that we start playing next week, you're all in the same universe and you're all still actually competing. The first week the game works like that, the first version of the game, to make it really, really simple, and so that like one team doesn't like totally crash and burn because the competitors like run them out of the market. But we're kind of gradually going to pull some of the training wheels off starting this next week. So I think that should be a lot of fun. All right. Well, our next stop, once I get everything shut down here, is going back into our discussion. And I'm hesitant to say this. I guess we will find out here for ourselves here firsthand in a moment. But I think I may finally have all of our technical issues fixed. And let's see if in fact that is the case. No, I don't want to do that. Let's see if my pen works. Yay! All right. So, we started in a discussion last week on the topic of Introduction to Enterprise Information Systems. And we went through the first few sets of slides in our discussion and talked about a variety of different things. We talked about the fact that when technology first came to business, it came tied to these, what we called functional areas. So the people in accounting might have gotten a computer. The people in human resources might have gotten a computer. Different parts of the organization got a computer system to help them with the work that they were doing in their individual functional area. And that was fine. That was something that was very helpful to organizations. It enabled them to perhaps improve their business processes and do their work more efficiently. But it also created some problems that we still see today. These computer systems, when they were brought in, they were all independent of one another. Now, part of the reason for that was networked computer technology was not readily available like it is today. I mean, computers were still in their infancy, so the idea of hooking a bunch of them together for the sake of sharing information was not a common business practice. So the systems were independent, and then beyond that, the systems were very, very tightly coupled to the needs of an individual functional area. So the people that worked in purchasing, they would have a computer that was very, very focused on what they needed to be able to do as employees working in the purchasing department. The salespeople had their own computer system that was very much focused on the work that the salespeople needed to do. So we had these independent, tightly coupled computer systems that formed the foundation of how technology first came to business. And as we observed last week, the problem with this is this creates these data silos where individual areas have their own data stores, have their own information hoarding going on, and this is not reflective of the way businesses operate. Businesses need to share information. Different functional areas need to have the ability to easily pass information from one part of the organization to another. Business activities require interaction between the different functional areas. And the paper that you read for this week, the book chapter, focused in very heavily on this concept of a business process and how much of what is done in information technology involves bringing automation to a business process for the sake of improving what we achieve within our organization. A business process is a sequence of defined activities undertaken by an organization to achieve corporate goals that cut across functional areas. And so it involves a certain set of things. A business process has to be coordinated. What we want to have happen is when step A finishes and now step B is supposed to happen, we want step B to happen as soon as step A finishes. What we don't want to have happen is the people in one area finish step A and they write it down on a bunch of paper and then mail it to the people in another part of the organization, and 4 days later now they know they can start with step B. We want this to be very, very coordinated so that as soon as one thing finishes, we can start on the next thing right away so that we can achieve efficiency here. So in order for this to happen, we have to be coordinated and we have to have unified data and understanding. And this actually goes back to something we were talking about a moment ago when we were talking about charting. If I were, for example, to say 15,000, is that good or bad? Oh, yeah. How are you even going to answer that question? Well, 15,000 of what? If that's like how many times somebody's going to punch you in the face, that's probably not a real good number. If that's how much money you're going to see in your paycheck at the end of the week, you might be pretty happy with that, okay? So we have to know the context. Where we get into problems is, I think the number is 15,000, somebody else thinks the number is 9,500, so we don't even agree about the number. Or maybe we agree about the number, but we're not on the same page. So I think that means how much money I'm going to get paid, and you think that means how many times you get to punch me in the face, okay? We have to have an understanding where we're all on the same page, we're all looking at the same data, seeing the same numbers, and gaining the same understanding. And that sounds real easy for me to say, but you've lived life. You know how often problems occur because one person is thinking one thing and another person is thinking something different. And it's not that they're like purposely trying to sabotage one another, but because there's that misunderstanding, problems ensue. Well, we can't have that happen in our business processes. We have to have coordinated processes. We have to have unified data and understanding. And so a key element in this is the concept of what is called a handoff, or we could call it a data handoff. And so very simply, we'll stick with the diagram I started here at the top, very simple. Step A, and then I do step B, and then I do step C. Well, maybe step A is done by the people in HR, and step B is done by the people in IT, and step C is done by the people in manufacturing. Well, what I have to do is make sure that HR passes to IT all the information it needs to do its job, and IT passes to manufacturing all the information it needs, and that these data handoffs happen very, very, very smoothly. I can tell you that that's really easy to say, but really, really hard to achieve. Even here at ETSU, where we have a wide variety of all kinds of different processes for things, sometimes you'll find that on Monday, you perform the equivalent of step A. And so you're expecting somebody else to do their job, which is to do step B, and 3 or 4 days later they haven't done it yet. And you wind up calling them on the phone and they say, oh, I didn't even know it was my time to do that. So the point that we were in the middle of making here, and where we'll pick back up, is this idea that these business data silos create all kinds of problems for an organization that wants to be efficient, wants to operate effectively, and really in today's environment, it's what you have to have in order to continue to exist as a business. Think about, for example, Amazon. Probably all of you have bought something from Amazon before, or if you haven't, you're at least familiar with it, I trust. How many things would be impossible if we didn't have computers? You know, Amazon, obviously, first of all, they couldn't take your order over the internet if there was no such thing as computers. But beyond that, could Amazon ever ship your order out as quickly as they do? Without the supporting technology enabling their business processes. I've had times before where I've placed an order at 8 o'clock in the morning, and by 10:30 that morning, I have a tracking number where they've already shipped the product out. That means in that period of 2.5 hours, not only did they have to process my credit card and make sure I could pay for the item, somebody had to go and fetch it out of the warehouse and put it in a box and put a label on it, and they had to transfer it to UPS, and UPS had to give them a tracking number, and they had to send me that tracking number, and all of that happened in a matter of 2 hours or so, and most of it happened without a human being directly involved in it. As a matter of fact, of all the steps that I just named, the only part of it that we know a human likely had a part in was getting the thing and putting it in a box. And even that anymore is something that robots and other things can help with. But everything else is automated, you know? And so this idea of if we're going to have a business function effectively and efficiently, we're going to have all of these different business processes that have to be coordinated, and we have all of the data management needs that go along with it. So where did enterprise information systems come from? That term, enterprise information system, let me back up for a moment. There's the term functional information system. And based on our discussion to this point, you should very easily understand what this is. A functional information system is designed to handle the information needs of a single functional area. So, if our warehouse people need a particular piece of software to do their job, and it only relates to information needs within the warehouse, and it really is a system that solely supports them, that would be a functional information system because it helps out in a single functional area. But as soon as we change the term up and start talking about an enterprise information system, what is an enterprise information system? You've seen this in your reading, but let me give you a definition here on the slide here. It is a software system, and technically you could probably have an information system without it being computerized, but in a contemporary world, anything of an enterprise level is clearly going to have to involve technology. So it's a software system designed to support clearly the word information is about to show up somewhere, but what about information? Well, it's designed to support the capture, the manipulation, the storage, analysis, and I'll just put an etc. there for other things, of information to support business operations. So an enterprise information system is a software system designed to support the capture, manipulation, storage, analysis, etc. of information system to support business processes. And because we know business operations span across multiple functional areas, what's implied by this is the idea of this being a cross-functional system. And when we say cross-functional, particularly in this context, we're talking about a system that is used across the different functional areas. Now, in your playing of ERP Sim, it's obviously a mythical company, but the software that you used and the transactions you ran are the same ones that organizations use that actually use the SAP ERP software. If you think about what you experienced, you put in a sales forecast, you ran MRP, and you converted purchase requisitions to purchase orders. I do a very similar function of that, it seems like almost every day in my job, where as part of her work, Sonia will put purchase requisitions into the university's purchase systems. I'll review them, I'll click a few buttons, and a purchase order goes out to a vendor to actually have that fulfilled. So what you did is something that happens innumerable times across this country every day in business. And the key is because every part of the organization knows what's going on. See, when I order stuff, and sometimes this is frustrating to me, it doesn't come right to my office. I order stuff, and I don't know if any of you have ever driven by the building, but kind of on the back side of campus, on the other side of that overpass thing, is where the university has a warehouse for central receiving. Have you noticed how you pretty much never see like a UPS truck on campus itself? It's because all deliveries go to that warehouse. And so the stuff goes to the warehouse, and there are clerks there that check everything that comes in to make sure that what came in was what we ordered, and then they route it out to the individual areas. So it's pretty common that what happens is I order something on Monday, Amazon delivers it to the campus on Tuesday, and it shows up in my office on Wednesday, which is still pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. But that whole process involves several different functional areas, and it just works. It happens very, very efficiently and very, very effectively because it is aided by a cross-functional information system that unites the efforts of people that are looking to buy things with the people that work in the warehouse, with the delivery people, and even with the vendors that receive the orders. That's an example of the kind of thing that an enterprise information system takes on. So what's the value here? And some of this we've already talked about, so we'll go really, really quickly here. We said historically, the functional areas, they had their own independent information systems. There was no coordination. Information exchange was very, very poor. And so the whole idea here is the value of enterprise information system is it has the ability to kill off these silos and to allow us to have a unified system for handling information. So we talked previously about the fact that while the goal might be to have one computer system in our company that does everything, I'm not aware of any company that could actually achieve that. But the desire is to have as few systems as we possibly can to allow us to accomplish our business processes as efficiently and effectively as possible. Questions about any of this? I had a slide here about a business process. I guess we'll look at it together, but since you read an article about it, you should know quite a bit about this already. A business process is simply a set of linked activities that create value by transforming input into more valuable output. And most business processes are performed by people, typically in a variety of functional areas, but supported by technology. So I have a hypothetical business process here for applying for and getting a loan. Let's say, for example, you want to buy a car, you want to buy a house, you just need a loan from a bank. Well, you might go to the bank's website and you fill out a loan form and you click the submit button. Well, then the bank receives the loan application, and the very first thing they're going to do is check your credit rating. And I don't know if you've done this before, but if you go online now to most credit card companies and fill out the form, a lot of times you can click the button and they'll tell you right away whether they're going to give you a credit card or not. Sometimes they'll say, congratulations, you're approved, you have a X dollar credit line. And the reason why they can do it is because they've automated this very process right here. They check your credit rating. And let's say you have a good credit rating in their estimation. So what happens? They send you a loan approval email, or they send you a credit card approval email, and they say, congratulations, we're glad you're going to be our customer. In about 2 weeks, you'll receive a card in the mail, but before then, here's how you can do blah, blah, blah. And you now have credit from that particular organization. But you might think that, well, if I don't get that, that means I don't get the loan. I don't get the credit card. Well, in fact, that's not the way most organizations will handle it. If you have a poor rating, then what actually happens is a human being looks at your application. And the human being has certain guidelines that they're going to look at, and they'll decide whether or not to accept you or reject you. For example, the human being might look at your credit rating and they might say, well, this person has a really great credit rating, or this person has a score that's low. And when I look at why the score is low, I can see that 5 years ago they missed a couple of payments, but ever since then they've done a great job. They look like they'd be a great customer. Let's accept their application for a loan. Or they might look at it and say, wow, this person never pays their bills. We don't want to give them a loan at all. And then you get rejected. Now, if you look at this and you think about it, what is the automation authorized to do? Send out the approval, right? Can the automation reject someone? Only a human can actually reject someone. So you see, the automation basically just looks at all the applications and pulls out all the good ones and says, oh yeah, you're good, and it approves that automatically. If someone doesn't make that cut, then a human being looks at it. So let me ask you this. Could we, in keeping with what you read in your article for this week, could we re-engineer this process? The answer to that is yes. Any process can be re-engineered. Now, it might not be better, but it can be re-engineered. We can figure out a different way of doing it. What could be a different way that this process could work that might improve it?
You could create an algorithm that does the manager's job.
Okay, we could, the whole focus here is, do they get credit or don't they get credit? And right now, it looks like this is a pretty simplistic algorithm. For example, what it's probably doing is it's probably saying, is their credit score 700 or greater? And if it's 700 or greater, they go this way. Otherwise, they go down here. Well, maybe we could write a more sophisticated algorithm. Maybe we could write an algorithm that would say if it's above 700, they still get it. No problem there. And then we say if it's between 500 and 700. And I don't know what the actual scaling of these are, so I'm using kind of mythical numbers here. If it's between 500 and 700, then we have one set of humans that look at it, and they look at it just very, very quickly, because 500 to 700 isn't great, but it's still okay. And then we might have an algorithm that says, but if somebody has a credit score of less than 100, just automatically send them a no. It doesn't matter whether a human looks at it or not. Clearly there's something wrong there, so we would want to reject them. So we could we could re-engineer this process. Now let me ask you this. What part of this process would we want to try to minimize?
Manager review.
The manager's review, right? I mean, the checking of credit rating is done by a computer. It probably takes it, let's say it takes it 2 seconds to check your credit rating. Would we want to spend a lot of time trying to get that down to half a second? You know, if I said, if you give me $500,000, I can cut that by a quarter and I can get down to half a second. What's the matter whether it takes half a second or 2 seconds? That's fast enough. The potential slow part is this right here. The manager reviews the application. So what could we do to make this part of the process efficient? Because this part of the process right here, this is what's commonly called a bottleneck. Because how would you like to be the manager who works for the company who grants credit for Apple, and the day after Apple has one of their trade shows where they try and convince everybody on the planet to buy a new iPhone, and as a result you come in the next day and you have 750,000 applications to review for credit? I mean, and that's not that unrealistic a situation, because Apple does hire a company to grant credit. And so after a big Apple launch, you can go online, actually do a Google search for this, and you'll see people complaining. I wanted to order an iPhone the first day it was out. I went to their website, I applied for credit. My credit is perfectly good, but for some reason the website said, we'll get back to you. And then I didn't get a response for 2 months. And so I bought another phone instead. Well, that's clearly a problem. If people really are not buying from Apple when ultimately they would have, and ultimately if they would have been approved for credit, because this part of the process is too slow. So we might look to re-engineer this process to try and improve the application review process. Now, how many business processes do most organizations have? And the answer to that is hundreds. I mean, you have a process for, in this case, processing a loan application. You have business processes related to hiring people. You have processes related to firing people. Every product you make probably has multiple processes associated with the manufacturing of that product. There are processes that are used by your salespeople. There are just innumerable business processes in most organizations. And the role of technology is to try and support these processes and allow companies to be able to fulfill them more effectively. We'll make this our last slide for today as kind of our culminating thought here. A number of years ago, IBM did a study where they interviewed and sent surveys to chief executive officers for companies. So these would be like the business leaders of an organization. And they asked very similar questions of chief information officers, which these are more the technology people. And they asked the CEO, what do you see is your job as a CEO? You know, this is kind of the equivalent of if somebody went to President Nolan and said, what do you see your job as being as part of the president of the university? Universities are a little bit different, but the CEOs that IBM interviewed said, we're looking for revenue growth and cost containment. And by the way, if we were to ask President Nolan, I guarantee you one of the first things out of his mouth would be to grow ETSU. He wants ETSU. I think the goal is by 2025 to have 18,000 students. He wants to grow ETSU to be a larger university. So he's not as focused on revenue like a CEO might be at a commercial organization, but he's also focused on growing the organization and cost containment, making sure we're not wasting money, making sure we're getting the most out of the money that we spend. Responsiveness to business conditions. So the idea here is I want, if I'm the CIO, or CEO, excuse me, I want to be able to spot an opportunity in the market and capitalize on it. If we see something out there that we could take advantage of, we want to be able to jump on it. And I think similarly, President Nolan would say we want to figure out what it is that students are interested in. We want to figure out what companies are interested in terms of the people they're hiring in this region. And we want to create students that match up with those needs. We want to be responsive to the business conditions. And then the third thing that was on the CEO's list was improving the company's, I'm just going to abbreviate that, improving the company's internal skills. Internal skills, capabilities, and leadership. Which is basically a way of saying, the people that work here, I want them to progressively get better doing their jobs. I want them to be more capable over time. I want new leaders to emerge so that we can get better as a company. And I really think that if we were to ask President Nolan, he would say things that are very similar to this. And when IBM interviewed the chief executive officers of commercial organizations, these were the top 3 things they said. Well, then they asked the chief information officers, the people running IT, and they asked them, what do you see as your biggest challenge and the things that you are focused on? And their 3 answers were particularly interesting. Aligning IT and business goals. Now I want to pause there for a second because that, number 1, is a very important point, and that is not the first time we have made this point in this class. Where else did we say something about this issue of aligning IT and business goals? What other discussion was that a part of?
Or
Cars, IT doesn't matter. And we made the point that if IT supports the business and helps the business progressively get better and helps the business accomplish its goals, then IT is doing what it's supposed to do, and IT does add value in that situation. So the CIO said, the number 1 thing I focus on is aligning IT and the business goals. And then, number 2, building responsiveness and agility into the organization through IT. Which to me matches up pretty nicely with the third thing that the CEO said. I want to allow the business to be more responsive through IT, but it also touches with number 2, the responsiveness to the business conditions. The third one, enabling people to be more effective through IT. So the thing that I thought was particularly interesting that came out of this IBM study was what you would hope to happen was that the CIO was very much in alignment with what the CEO was saying, with the obvious difference being that the CIO was focused on the role of technology in doing those things, while the CEO had a broader focus in what he or she was saying in that situation. So to put all of what we talked about today into context, companies have these business processes that they have to do as a way of executing their business, as a way of doing what they need to do to sustain operations. They need to figure out a way how to do those in a way that is cost effective and allows them to be very agile and respond to business conditions, while at the same time not turning their employees into people that are essentially mindless automatons. You know, one of the things that that I reference that you may or may not be familiar with. How many of you ever watch Star Trek? Anybody here Star Trek fans? Okay, so some of you are Star Trek fans. The rest of you, I guess, need to start watching Star Trek to understand this analogy. But if you've watched Star Trek, the TV versions of Star Trek, any of the last few iterations of it, you might be familiar with a race of characters called the Borg. And the whole idea behind the Borg is they're basically people that are assimilated by computers, and the people just do whatever the computer tells them. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about we want the computer to make all the decisions and the people just do what the computer tells them. That's not at all what anybody here is seeking. What we are looking for is the ability to create a business process that enables people to be able to do their jobs easily and focus on those things where they can really add more significant value to reference those things that you read in the article for today. Comments, questions, or such as we call our time together this afternoon to a close. All right, well, don't forget about your homework assignment, and I would encourage you to start early so that if you do have any questions, you can reach out. Please do not hesitate to do so. I am very happy to try and provide assistance where that would be helpful to you. Have a great rest of the day and a great weekend.